Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to a special 3 sponsor session where we have a special guest, David Loertscher, here with us today. He's in Washington State. I'm in his home state of Utah, and some of you were there with David physically, and some of you are virtually. And this is a combination of a Washington Library Media Association, Library 2.011, and Future of Education event. So thanks so much for being here. And David, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. And I understand you're in my absolute hometown where I was born, Park City.
Oh, now that's interesting. I am in Park City, and there's a little cemetery here. Do you have ancestors in that cemetery?
Well, I have my father and mother and my just late son that we lost just a few months ago. And if you check with if you're on your way up into town, you see the miners hospital, and that's where I was born. It's in a little park, and turned into the public library. So I say I'm the only librarian that was ever born in the library.
Well, what a fun connection, and what a testament to the wonderful connective powers of the internet. My interview series is sponsored by my Web 2.0 Labs project. We have support today from Blackboard Collaborate. That's the platform that we're using to connect with you. A couple of quick announcements. The Library 2.011 conference is a free 2-day conference being held the 2nd and 3rd of November. 160 sessions, all online, all free at library2011.com. Our Global Education Conference is the 14th to the 18th of November. Same principle, lots of fun. This is the 2nd year for that conference, and it runs over 5 days, if you can believe it, 24 hours a day. That should be a blast. We've also just announced the Learning 2.0 conference. Many of the themes we'll talk about today will probably fall into that category. And that's the week in January of the 23rd to the 27th. More information at learning20.com. Coming up on my Future of Education series, lots of fun interviews. Especially noteworthy, next week, Mark Sermon, the chair of the Mozilla Foundation, will be talking about the Open Badge project. Mike Marin on Road to the Nation. Lots of fun coming ahead. Feel free to go to futureofeducation.com, both to see the upcoming schedule and to see the list of recordings. Last night we had Gina Bianchini, former CEO of Ning and now of Mighty Bell, on Tim Wilson on his fascinating book Redirect about narratives and their impact on education. Peter Cookson on a Children's Education Bill of Rights. Lots and lots up there. Hopefully something that's of value to you. Now we get to check and see where our virtual participants are from. I'm going to give you all capability here to put a star on the whiteboard. So if you're a virtual participant, look to the left of the map and look for the second icon down. It's a star shape. Click on that. It sometimes takes 2 clicks. Move your cursor over onto the map and click down. And it's fun if you want to put out in the chat as well where you're listening from. Maybe the time and the temperature. We do have someone from New Zealand. Terrific. Now, if I've got my time zones right, this is fairly, what time is it for you in New Zealand? I would have guessed it's pretty darn early. So I don't know, David, if you've got anybody in your room now that's traveled a long distance to be there physically, but if we could, we'd recognize them as well.
I think almost all of them are from Washington State somewhere.
Well, that does make sense.
We've got an Idahoan.
Wherever you're listening from, or if you are listening to the recording, we do thank you for joining us and participating. So David, I'm really privileged. I feel like it's a privilege to get to know you in this way and to participate in this interview. Could you give us a little bit of your background so those who might not be familiar with you will understand the context of your work?
Well, the first 20 years of my life, from where you are in Park City, I milked cows. And so I was a farm boy and went to college and that sort of thing. I became interested in library science with the first class I ever took. Went off to the University of Washington here for my master's, went to Indiana University for a doctorate, and have taught in higher education and been in publishing for many, many years. And so I feel like I'm almost the grandfather of school libraries at this point, although wonderful people preceded me by 50 years. So yeah, it's been, and the first time I was one of the very first users of Blackboard when it came out. It was a free offering. And that was the time when I suddenly discovered that there was such a thing as an attachment to an email message. And so because I taught students all over California, we required that they attach their assignments to an email message. You would have thought we were asking them to climb Mount Everest, but they got over it and learned it, and the rest is history. And so I'm a totally online professor now at San Jose State University, and teach on Illuminate, but now it's going to your Collaborate, and I really appreciate that technology.
Well, and I should mention that San Jose State University is the founding sponsor of the virtual conference coming up, and we really do appreciate that. So I remember sending my first email, I should say I remember getting the first response back from someone from email and the thrill that there was. How much has our perception or sense of teaching and learning changed because of the technology? Where do we see teaching and learning differently now because of technology?
Well, I think there's kind of two camps. There are the people who transfer what they've already done from from face-to-face to technology, and I don't think that's a very successful thing that's been happening. But those who have learned that the technology, particularly collaborative kinds of writing, speaking, listening, those are the folks who have made the most difference in teaching and learning. And I discovered that as a teacher, you always want to make incremental progress from what you did last time to this time. But as I've started to use technology better, I begin to understand that it's not an incremental impact on the learner. It's an exponential. And so while I thought I would improve every semester, suddenly I could go. I could increase what I get out of students in the same amount of effort and time as what they used to do.
David, how much is this a news story, and how much is technology opening the door to kind of the alternate perceptions, the more progressive perceptions of education? Is this new, or is this a reshaping of previous understandings of more sort of liberal arts education?
In my experience, I think it is new. Everybody says that face-to-face education is the preeminent way of teaching. I don't believe it anymore. I used to think that was true, but not so. I use this technology every week in my teaching, and I can do things now that I could never have done before, by monitoring students, including everyone, using technologies that they're, for example, Google Docs, where everybody's writing, everybody's participating simultaneously, where, they used to have kids raise their hand and give a comment. Now everybody's talking and everybody's working. So it is a brand new world, truly an innovation, not just a transference of what we used to do over into, just a new version.
So how does that change the role of the student? There was a blog post this week that talked about our mistaking compliance for engagement. Do the technologies place us in a position where compliance is no longer the main goal?
I think, in the world that we now live in, there's two things happening. The first is the development of what I would call personal expertise, and that's what you know and are able to do as an individual. And that's still extremely important. But there's another thing that has appeared, and I call it collaborative intelligence, and that's the notion that I throw my personal expertise out on the table, and then around the table, together as a group, we construct something that none of us could have constructed as an individual. For example, the movie Up, which won the Academy Award, it took experts of a wide variety and to be able to sit down at a table, collaborate, and build an Academy Award-winning film. And I think in the flat world now, that's what's required of every child and teenager that's trying to build a career in and compete globally.
So before we talk about that learner, and I do want to talk about the learner, I want to talk about the library and librarians. But before we do that, I'm curious about the need for the adults as teachers, as librarians, to become familiar with these technologies themselves. How important is that, and how much can we ask them to help their students if they don't have the particular experiences themselves in using the web as a learning device?
Well, I think it's absolutely critical that all librarians move into the world where their students are. In other words, they've got to understand the world of social media, but also they've got to understand all of the learning technologies. They just cannot stay back in the world that you and I grew up in. It's just not a career option now to dismiss technology as a fad anymore or resist what is going. For example, last year, I mean, you may be a book lover, but last year I think e-books outsold printed books. So the world moves on, and we have to move with it, or we're just gone.
I am a book lover, and then what I've found intriguing is that my reading has multiplied exponentially, and that while I still read physical books, that Kindle device, in my case it's an Android tablet with the Kindle software, has become an essential learning tool.
Well, I think it has for all of us, and there are, emerging technologies all the time that increase our capacity not only to survive and do our work better and faster, but also intellectually. We can now connect and become smarter as groups as well as an individual. It's just it is the most magnificent age I have ever encountered. I think I was back and I learned on a typewriter as you did, and who would ever go back to that world?
So describe for me your sense of the skills that the new learner needs. What do we need to be helping support students in doing?
Well, I've been writing and thinking along with Will Richardson and a bunch of other folks. What is it that the young person has to develop to be able to compete in today's world? And I think that the first thing they have to do is to build what I would call their own portal into the information world. And maybe that's their own iGoogle page or their own, maybe their own totally website. But they come into command of what they allow into their own personal space. most of us, or all of us, have learned that the internet is just a juggernaut that will run right over the top of us. And so every student, even young children, need to learn how to create their own safe space, but a space that they can allow in what they wish. And through that portal, then they are developing their own personal learning network, a place where they are connecting to people all over the world that they want to listen to, the messages that they want to attend to. It's part of building my own attention kind of thing, and I build my skill along with that. Librarians have usually termed those information literacy kind of skills. Others call them 21st century skills. So I build this personal learning network, and that all translates finally into my own e-portfolio, which is what I know and what I have helped through collaborative intelligence, what I've helped to build. And so of that world, there will be my private space of what I want to keep personal. But then there's my public persona, my public face, of what I am going to share out with the world. And so I'm thinking, really that's a kind of transferring every kid and building every kid into their own personal librarian. I mean, that's what librarians have done forever, gone out into the world of information, curated what it was, the very best, and then they've translated that into, what they're going to push out to the rest of the world. So anyway, that's my idea.
So in the teacher world where I live, it takes a fair amount of time and effort to help educators to even do these things for themselves, to build a personal learning network, to think about actually having an online presence. So that would seem to me to be one barrier, and I'm wondering if that's faced by librarians as well. And the second barrier to me would be just the lack of school time for this kind of activity in a more test-driven society. Are you seeing those same two barriers?
Well, those barriers do exist, but they're fading. I've gone to national conferences of ISTE for a number of years now, and I think it's changing. I mean, we've got tech directors who have been very fearful to open networks to kids, realizing that they might damage them and hack them and all those sorts of things. But I think the trend is now to realize that there's a difference between administrative computing and instructional computing. And administrative computing, is where all the grades and the salaries and the attendance and all of that sort. So that has to be locked down. But more and more folks with an educational background are becoming tech directors. And they see the opposite point of view, that it's how much you open the network to use is your mark that you're making on the world. So and I think that teachers are starting to realize that too. And because the tools now are so intuitive, I think we can win over just lots of teachers who once thought technology was just beyond their capacity to learn. And I think one of the ways that I've used, and I think a lot of teachers, if they'll just accept it, is to have their own geek squad around them. That is, kids who already are tech savvy, and we establish in our classroom this kind of feeling that I'll teach you and you teach me and we'll all learn together, so that it's not always the teacher having to be the smart techie person. We can all, and that is a major shift, I think, in a lot of teachers' lives. But once they accept that, then I think they just blossom and grow.
So another sort of significant shift, maybe an overwhelming shift, is the shift of responsibility to the student to sort of self-direct their own learning. Are you seeing examples of this where schools or libraries are doing a good job of helping students assume that new responsibility?
Well, I would hope so. After this session, we are having another session with 5 different teacher librarians from across North America who have evolved from libraries to learning commons. And in every case, I think they're going to talk about the whole transformation of their lives as professionals as well as the kids' lives. And they start to see this phenomenon happening where kids start taking command of their own learning. I mean, we could ask that of ourselves. At what point in our education life did we transfer from just being regurgitators of what teachers were telling us to do? When did we take command of our own learning? And now I think the possibility with all the technology and the kids' skills, they can start realizing that as children rather than waiting until you're quote doctoral years, which I did. I did not take command of my own learning until I was in doctoral seminars, and I resent that. And now that we can give that gift now through technology to the young person, and what a gift it is.
So I'm going to ask my one hard question of the interview. Like you've described, many of us kind of came to that mastery of or sense of our own interest in learning later in life. It feels like in a lot of ways libraries and librarians are either losing their jobs or being portrayed as not being as significant as it would appear they really are in this larger network story. Are there institutional forces that will push back against this kind of change?
There are a tremendous number of voices out there. I read them all the time. I read a tremendous amount of professional literature. And the voices that are there that are begging us to develop kids who are critical thinkers, creative producers, kids with deep understanding rather than superficial kind of learning. The voices there are a huge number of them, but I don't think many of those voices connect anything that they're thinking about with their traditional concept of the library. It just happens so rarely in professional literature that anyone of the stature of notoriety across education ever mentions the word library, and that stereotype which they learned as a child about the function of a library in their life, which now has moved far past what it used to be. That connection does not seem to be there, and I think it's contributing to the demise of many jobs across the nation and the world.
So tell us what a learning commons is.
Well, a learning commons transforms a library and a computer lab into a client-side organization. In other words, instead of being constructed by a specialist, a librarian, it turns into a guided creation by the expert, but everybody is participating in the creation of that kind of thing. So we titled it Learning Commons because its focus, number one, is learning. It is not the storage and retrieval of information. I mean, that's a part of it. That's its foundation. But that is not its central focus. Its central focus is how much are kids learning in this information-rich and technology-rich environment. And then the second word, commons, is a very historic term in the history of the United States. We think of the Boston Commons, which is the open place where everybody gathered, and it is the foundation of democracy. So everybody was participating. Everybody is contributing. It's the kind of society Wikipedia type of thing where the crowd is speaking. Everybody's talking. Everybody's listening. Everybody's building. Everybody's constructing. So we take a library which used to be the storage space of the school, and we transform it into this collaborative, kind of exciting, discovery, learning, inquiry-based place, a place to create, a place to collaborate, a place to share, all sorts of, anything that you can think of that promotes the type of learning that everybody is begging and that our schools educate kids to be able to do.
So what are the barriers to this kind of a commons being built? What do people who want to do this have to overcome?
Well, the first thing they have to do is, if you think in the physical sense, I mean, I go into lots of school libraries around the country, and the first thing when you walk in the door, the first impression you generally get is that it's a storage space rather than a learning space. And that's because, you know, most of the space is taken up by immovable objects, whether it's banks of bookshelves or long tables of computers that are you know, networked and can't be moved in the physical facility. And so one of the first things that has to happen is you have to kind of clear out that space. You ask the question, if it doesn't move, does it really belong here? That means that the facility itself has to become flexible. So, for example, the 8 o'clock in the morning, it might be in one configuration to handle small groups, large groups coming in a particular hour, but by the second hour, there are different needs that the learners have, and so the physical facility itself adapts to the learner, not the other way around. And so in physical space, that's a place to start. And for example, we were in Sue Kowalski's library. She's a middle school librarian in New York. And we just had a group of people go into her space and just kind of look at it and say, you know, how many individuals can we have working simultaneously? How many small groups can be working simultaneously? How much production, you know, is it wireless so that you can you bring your own device and you can sit down anywhere and compute and connect so that I can be working? What about the tables? I mean, library tables are generally, they weigh 150 pounds or something, can't be moved. Suddenly you can replace those with smaller triangles or oval shapes, and so the furniture moves for whatever has to happen in quiet to noisy to producing to studying to all of those sorts of things. So the first, in the physical sense, you have to attack, you know, what this place, what is its function, and that has to transform first to learning, and then the stuff, you know, all the stuff we have, which is, you know, books, physical books, but now digital collections are much larger than the physical collection, you know, the printed collection. So we just have to attack that whole idea when you walk into the place. For example, in Valerie Diggs High School Learning Commons in Massachusetts, you walk in and the signs say, ask, think, create. The signs don't say nonfiction here, fiction there. You see, it's that transforms everything. It just, when you walk in, it's a totally different feeling. So the environment itself is that third teacher, which is the name of a title of a book that was published last year by group of architects.
In the case of the school library, in an environment that's often testing-driven and financially strapped, who has to champion these kinds of learning commons? What allies do you need to create such a space?
Well, ownership of a learning commons has to transfer from the librarian to the client. And that's the same in a classroom. In a classroom, you know, we usually think of the teacher as the director, and you do what I say. However, there's been a great movement to turn teachers into coaches rather than dictators of learning. And the same has to happen in a library. So you have to gather around you some folks who understand that this place can be owned by everyone and that the outcome will be, you know, super in comparison to what its function was in the past. So it's called a leadership team. And you can take them virtually or physically to find a learning commons, talk to the kids, talk to the teachers. You first have to have a vision, and then that starts to transform into your own school environment.
Okay, so tell us what a virtual learning commons is.
Well, the virtual learning commons is a fabulous thing to think about. I think all librarians have some sort of website. And the website that they have, of course, is a one-way stream of information from them as experts to the client out there. But one thing we have learned long ago is that kids bypass our websites and they go directly to Google. And we perpetually have just continued to grow, create larger websites with more links and etc. But if you go out and do a lunchroom test, you'd probably find out that given any information sources, kids are going to Google much more often than they're coming to your website. So a virtual learning commons has to turn, just like the physical place, it has to turn from a one-way stream of information to a dual stream. That is, it turns into more of a Wikipedia type place where everybody's contributing. And everybody, that means teachers are adding to that space, students are adding to that space, parents can be adding to that space, experts, certainly administrators are adding to that space. And so it becomes the learning place of the school that everybody is in there. So the idea is if we build it, they won't use it. If they build it, they will use it. And because they have ownership in that virtual learning commons. Now that concept is so foreign to, I think, librarians and tech directors trying to understand how you would allow kids to post on the library website or the virtual learning commons just starts to bring panic to the entire school environment. However, it's not as difficult as one would think, and there's so many models out there that the virtual learning commons has truly, I think, a tremendous potential, particularly for so many librarians now who are part-time in a particular school. They can reach all of the children in multiple schools through the virtual learning commons because in ways they could never reach them physically because they can't be physically present in the particular, in all of the schools where they have a responsibility.
It would seem that it would be certainly easier to manage a library or students in a compliance model versus the kind of engaged conversation you're describing. Is it fair to say that those who move forward in this way have to be fairly courageous?
Well, they do have a risk. They have to be risk takers, and they have to be techno smart, and they have to be digital natives, just like the kids that are inhabiting the schools where they teach. I think the challenge to be able to do that, it's people who persist in taking care of the warehouse, I think are starting to realize that those days are over, that clericals can handle much of the acquisition, the storage and retrieval, circulation, etc. Of the job. And so what they really need to do is decide to move to the center of teaching and learning, or they just don't have a role at all anymore in the school.
David, is this the right site for people to go to if they're interested in learning more about Learning Commons?
Yes, you do have. That's one place to go, and yes, that's where the conversation is going. This site is kind of the extension of the Learning Commons book that we published in 2008, and they're publishing next week in a second edition. And so, yes, this is the site that accompanies that particular book.
So when I looked up Learning Commons, I don't know if you heard that, when I looked up Learning Commons on Amazon, I found two or three books. Is there one you would recommend as the primary book to look at? And we've lost audio from you if you're there.
Yes, there's the major book is by myself, Carol Kirshner, and Sandy Zwan, a couple of Canadians, and it's called The New School Learning Commons, Where Learners Win. And then there's a book by Esther Rosenfeld for administrators on how to build a learning commons. And then we've collected all of the articles called Learning Commons Treasury from that we've published in Teacher Librarian, and that's a collective set. So those are the major resources.
So we've got a few minutes before we move to Q&A. You might want to, if you want to have people in the physical audience there ask questions, just alert me, and we'll be silent while you take those questions from the physical audience. But before we go there, I'm interested in your own personal use of technology. And I understand that at one point in time, a couple of years ago, there was a little bit of a debate about whether or not there was something called Library 2.0 and maybe some contention around it. Do you feel that there is something called Library 2.0, or what are the salient issues involved there?
I definitely feel there's Library 2.0 because, as I think I said before, the amount of digital information out there that we have access to now dwarfs the few books that we're able to, even though they're in the thousands, the few books that we're able to assemble in a particular collection. So it's just not the same at all, and I think most librarians recognize that the world is totally different. Let me just give you an example of ebooks are getting so popular now, and really what an ebook is just the transference of words from a printed piece to a technological device. But I've been experimenting with what we call book to cloud. And a book to cloud takes a piece of text and turns it, or a book. In fact, I write textbooks, and I'm using book to cloud textbooks now in my courses. And what that does is it puts a piece of text, or like a poem, or Gettysburg Address, or Peter Rabbit. It puts that onto a Google site, and instead of just going through the book and consuming it as a book, it invites you to create around that book. So, for example, I put up which I have done, put up the Gettysburg Address. You can take, so here sits on the front screen the Gettysburg Address in total, but each one of the lines, each one of the concepts has a different line and a different link. And so you can link from that particular phrase out into a room. And in that room, all of the readers, the learners in your class can be contributing. What does that mean? What does it mean 77 years ago? What was that? Or we say, this happened in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. What is Gettysburg, Pennsylvania? And everybody can start building content, and then they can start talking about that content, and they can start they can write, because all of that content they've collected together is there. So it turns an ebook into a collaborative conversation with the original author. Now, even in the textbooks that I write now, I put out, you can watch my chapter that I wrote the way I wrote it, but then I also provide an editable version. So you as the reader can go in and you can start adding links, you can disagree with me, you can start to play with my words, and I encourage my students to do that. So I think there's a future for librarians in the creation, not only of just supplying original text, but providing interactive text in ways that kids can then construct around. And of course, the objective is to build very deep understanding and also build information skills while we're doing it. So I'm learning how to learn while I'm building deep understanding about complex text, which of course is one of the major goals of the Common Core standards as they're coming out.
So I'm fascinated by that vision. Essentially, the book becomes the platform for the conversation. Is there a web link or some way in which people interested in that could find out more about Book to Cloud?
I think if you go to sites.google.com/site/ that's the way they all start, and then Gettysburg Address B2C, you arrive there, and maybe so that's the idea. And I'll just say that again: sites.google.com/site, and then /Gettysburg Address, all one word, B2C. That's Book to Cloud. Book to Cloud, and you'll see that's the big prototype we have up now, but we'll be creating many of them and asking people to build collaborative kinds of texts, or it could be a video, or it could be anything, but taking a piece and building a conversation around it.
Terrific. Okay, so we're going to switch to Q&A. We have about 15 minutes left. If you have a question in the virtual room for David, you can either ask it by putting it in the chat, or you can raise your hand, which is the third icon over in the participant window, the raise hand icon, and we'll give you the microphone. David, if you have anybody in your room asking a question, just let me know and we'll pause while you take the question there. If you do get a question from your room, please repeat the question because we probably won't be able to hear it. So while we're waiting for a question to come in, I run an unconference each year before the ISTE conference, and I understand that you run a pre-conference called Treasure Mountain. Can you tell us about it?
Well, Treasure Mountain's going to happen in a couple weeks. It's in 1982 we met in Park City, Utah, and we met a group of scholars of the field, joined with practitioners, and for over 20 years now we've been meeting, and it's a chance for researchers and practitioners to get together and talk about the theory of the field and translating that into practice. And the job of the researcher is to educate the practitioner, and the practitioner's job is to try to keep the academic down into the real world. And so it's been a wonderful, wonderful Big Think conference.
We did get a question in the chat asking about copyright issues with the book-to-cloud concept.
Well, of course there are copyright issues, and so, but you've got a world of, classics and things that kids study, all the Shakespearean works. I mean, so right now it's easy to build those, and particularly in the downturn of the economy. Take the classical texts or the, and even if you can build a book to cloud by even just linking to this into the text. I mean, you may not be able to copy the text onto your website, but you can always link to it, and then build the pages where you say, okay, chapter 1, chapter 2, or line 3 of this poem, or you don't have to actually copy the copyrighted text in to build the book to cloud concept.
There's an interesting connection here. By chance, I sat on a plane trip next to the gentleman at Amazon who's overseeing the new Kindle Fire project, and they have a very substantial difficulty or hurdle in that they don't have the rights to repurpose content to put it into that kind of a conversation space. So it should be interesting to see. Seems as though the open books and open resources are going to have a real head start here.
Well, I think you're right. We shouldn't let copyright be the barrier to it, because if we can't actually, everybody can own a copy of the book. For example, The Help, for example. That book is there, so everybody can have that book in hand, but then there's the book to cloud version where all the conversation and construction is working, and so nobody is violating copyright law.
Okay, if you have a question for David, feel free to put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand. We don't want to skip anybody in the physical room, so we'll hope that David will let us know if somebody does raise their hand. George is asking, I was wondering if you could speak more about getting schools on board with the technology of now.
Activism, having kids demand it. Kids are doing it in, any school who figures that they can lock kids out of their own devices that they bring to school are just fooling themselves. And kids have all kinds of ways to get around it. And at some point you have to say, what are we teaching kids? Are we teaching them to be hackers and always to get around the system? Or are we inviting them in and having them help construct the system? And once you finally face that issue, then you start saying, why don't we start from an open perspective, which is what we do in the physical world, okay? So all the dangers are there. We have to teach kids to cross the street. Well, are we going to lock them up in their rooms and never let them out, so we'll never let them cross the street, because it's dangerous? No, we teach them how to cross the street. And so the same thing in school. We teach them how to build their own information networks, how to keep themselves safe, how to be good digital citizens, all of those sorts of things.
So we have Claire who's raised her hand. Claire, I've given you the microphone. To turn your microphone on, you click on the talk button at the top left of your screen. Let's see if your mic comes on. Oh, no mic. So Claire, did you want to ask a question? Feel free to put it in the chat and we'll give you some priority here. We did have a question from Christine. David, I'm interested if you have any thoughts about changes in higher ed.
Well, I think higher ed needs to change as much as the K-12 arena. I mean, I use the way I teach with your technology, Collaborate, which is absolutely wonderful. Okay, I use it not, I can put people into groups, I can give them assignments, I can bring them back into the major room so that everybody's talking constantly. But I also move Collaborate off to the side and use it kind of as like a conference call. And then everybody's working out on the rest of their screens in various Web 2.0 technologies, so that during class we are not only talking and having a conversation, but we're also building and constructing in real time. So we can gather data, for example, in a Google form right during the class and bring it into a spreadsheet, and then we can do analysis and synthesis of that information in real time. That was not possible before. So I think with a combination of technologies, what I can get out of my students as graduate students is exponential. I mean, my students this semester, as compared with students 10 years ago in my classes, they're head and shoulders above what my former students were able to do, and it's all because of the technology.
There's some delightful material from John C. Brown about the learning to do peer reviewing, which in his case didn't happen until after he'd actually gotten his advanced degrees, but ended up being one of the most significant parts of his work, and he'd wished that had happened earlier. So Claire wanted to know, what are the implications of Web 3.0 or the semantic web and artificial intelligence for the future of libraries?
Well, I think it's not really known yet. I think the semantic web, in theory, has many things that are theoretically possible. And so I think as it develops, then I think librarians are just going to have to experiment with it and figure out, what they've been doing over the years in organization of information, how that can happen in 3.0 better than it did in 2.0. And so I think that is, the jury's still out on that one. But I am certain, that the potential there is tremendous, and I think we'll investigate it as much as we can and start talking about it on our systems and networks, and we'll all learn as a community together how to take advantage of it.
I worry that sometimes we try and move past 2.0 too quickly. For me, 2.0 is about participation, and that feels like the huge historic shift. And I want us to dwell there for a while.
Well, I agree with that, because we haven't even begun to milk the possibilities of Web 2.0 yet. I am still learning every day how to cram more in less time so that my learners progress at a faster rate and know much more. I always throw away my last semester's work, because I think, what have I learned since last semester? In techniques of teaching as well as new technologies, and how could I compress, what I know today, join that with the subject matter and produce a better learner, as well as a more knowledgeable learner.
So we have just a couple of more minutes. David, do you have anybody in the physical room who had a question?
Doesn't look like we do.
So the temptation to segue from your milking Web 2.0 to back to the beginning of our conversation where you were milking cows in Park City, I'm going to have to bypass that because I have one final question for you, which is, what is the big think?
Okay. The big think is, the best way to describe that is you've got athletic coaches who are trying to win ball games. They videotape the ball game. And then on Monday after the game was on Friday, they sit down with the team, both the coaches and the players, and they review the videotape of the ball game. And they do that because they've got to analyze and synthesize what went right and what went wrong. And if we're going to be prepared for next Friday and to try to win the game next Friday, we have to do what I would call a metacognitive activity. So when a teacher and a librarian join hands to co-teach a learning experience, after the experience is over, after the grades are in, then with the learners, they have to kind of replay that learning experience with each other. And they do two things. They first look at the deep understanding they were able to build over time about the Gettysburg Address, for example. What do I know personally, and what did we build, the knowledge we built about that great speech? The second thing they do is they look back at the learning journey. How did we get from point A to point B? And what mistakes, we used technology. How did we use it? What went wrong? What went right? How could we use it better next time? So that every time the librarian is working with a learning experience, that big think at the end, the absolute end, catapults the whole group. The next time we do a learning experience together, we will be more sophisticated. We will be able to win the next ball game better than we were able to do the last one. So over time, over a school year, the kids from September to June, they get more and more sophisticated at doing that. And it's all because of the big think activity.
I think that's the perfect place to stop because I could hear the passion in your voice. I'm clapping for you. There's a little icon there, the smiley face, and if you scroll over that and go down, there's an applause button. So thank you, David. We've been speaking with David Loertscher, who is at the WLMA conference. Thank you for coming in. Thanks for those of you who participated both virtually and physically. A terrific session, lots of fun. David, thanks again.